In a Nuzlocke, any Pokemon that faints is boxed forever, and I'm gonna try to beat Pokemon Violet, attempting to get all the way to the final boss using only electric types. So let me know what your favorite electric type is down in the comments below while you leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. Now, technically the first electric type we add to the team is Miraidon, but since we can't battle with it, instead we start our journey the best possible way by receiving a level 5 Pikachu. And not only is this thing the cutest thing ever, it's also got a flying Terra type. But listen, Ash Ketchum just got booted off the anime.
You're fired.
They ask you how you are, you just
So there's no way I'm gonna be repeating his mistakes. Oh no, I'm immediately heading to Levincia to pick up a Thunderstone to get myself a Raichu. Now Pikachu already has access to Nasty Plot, but evolving gives us instant access to Thunderbolt. And with that incredibly deadly combination, the first gym is a piece of cake. And the fact that Titan Cloth has such abysmal special defense means it goes down in one hit. We then go up against Brassius, but since our Raichu has Fly, we rapidly soar to victory.
Humiliation.
And speaking of soaring, the Open Sky Titan gets dropped as well by a single Thunder. My plan was then to solo the first Team Starbase with Raichu, which is when I learned you have to have 3 Pokemon to even take on Team Star. Needing more fighters to join the fray, I head back to Poco Path to pick myself up a Palmy. Aside from the fact that this thing's basically just Pikachu at home, it's actually pretty good once it's fully evolved. I can't exactly say the same about my next Pokemon, Shinx. I love you, Shinx, but all you're good for is Intimidate. With the level cap at 20, I can get Palmy to level 18, evolving it into Palm-O. Palmo and I then bond over a quick evening walk, which is apparently all it takes for it to evolve into Palmot. And aside from the fact that this thing looks like Furby had a kid with Pikachu in a relationship devoid of any love whatsoever, it happens to be exactly what we need right now. You see, upon evolution, Palmot gains the additional fighting type, which gives us an incredible advantage over Giacomo, who runs the Dark-type Team Starbase. Having a fully evolved Pokemon at this early stage in the game makes it incredibly easy to set up with Bulk Up, giving us more defense to take less damage from Aerial Ace and then just protect the next turn to get more leftovers recovery. However, because the Starmobile is so incredibly fast, I also have to set up a couple of agilities just to make sure I'm faster. A +6 quad effective stab Brick Break is then easily enough to take out the Poniard, leaving Giacomo with only his Revavroom, which we now outspeed and also take out in one hit. Fine, Palmot, you've been accepted as part of the team despite your disturbing lineage. Starting my preparations for the Levincia gym, I start by leveling up Shinx, evolving it into Luxio. I then head back to Cortando to pick up an Eevee, and after finding a second Thunderstone, we can get ourselves a Jolteon. And so it's time to challenge Iono in a contest to see who's the best electric type user and content creator. And to be honest, I don't think she stands a chance on either account. To begin with, Palmot gets to shine once again, setting up attack and defense with Bulk Up, as Pluck barely does anything since it's a neutral hit. From there, I continue to set up my attack and defense to +6 and eventually take out the Wattrel with a Wild Charge. This setup with Palmot isn't exactly enough to deal with her Mismagius in the back, however, her next 2 Pokemon, Bellibolt and Luxio, just get absolutely destroyed by super effective digs. The reason we don't want to fight Mismagius with +6 attack is we might hit ourselves in confusion and accidentally take ourselves out, so I go ahead and swap out into Jolteon as she terrestrializes into an electric type. Mismagius then confuses us, but I can shake that off with a held Person Berry. Since I caught Jolteon as an Eevee, we can terrestrialize it into a normal type, and paired with its Volt Absorb, Mismagius doesn't have a single move that can hit us. The only reason I start off by going for Eerie Impulse is to lower Mismagius' special attack in case I hit myself in confusion to the point where I have to swap out. However, since Jolteon barely has any physical attack to speak of, this isn't a problem and we can easily take out the Mismagius, granting us the 3rd gym badge. And doing so gives us a few neat new options, for instance picking up a Rotom. This thing is an amazing pickup since its Levitate ability gives us an option to swap into our only weakness, ground types. The plan for right now isn't to take on Kofu quite yet since the level cap is only 27, however we can head over to Porto Marinata to complete his gym trial since all we have to do is drop a Thunder on this Floatzel. Once we've passed the trial, we get access to a few new auctions, one of which sells us the Rotom catalog. This exclusive brochure turns Rotom into the most useful Pokemon to have around the house since we can now turn it into a friendly washing machine. And much like our evolution into Palma, this development happens exactly when we need it, facing the Fire-type leader Mela. Her Torkoal does boost her Fire types by setting up the Sun, which we can easily counter by setting up a Rain Dance of our own. This will mean her Fire-type moves barely do any damage at all. It also allows me to easily take out Torkoal in a single hit, and since the worst thing the Starmobile can do to me is Swift, a couple of Hydro Pumps takes care of it as well. Switching Rotom into a microwave oven allows us to torch Earthworm in a single overheat, making our new level cap 30, allowing us to evolve Luxio into Luxray. From there, we have to take on one of our best matchups in the game, Gym Leader Kofu and his water types. And it is finally time for Raichu to make his triumphant return. I start out by going for agility since Veluza can't take me out even if Aqua Cutter gets a critical hit, and the added speed allows me to take it out with a single Electro Ball. Kofu then sends in Wugtrio, which I of course outspeed, however Electro Ball isn't quite enough to take it out, but since Veluza didn't crit, we can survive the headbutt on 13 HP, taking out the Wugtrio the next turn. Kofu then sends in his ace Crabominable, but because of its terrible base speed of 43 and it conveniently turning into a water type for us, we can easily take it out with an agility boosted Electro Ball, proving that Raichu is still worthy of the MVP status. Considering our next opponent is the toxic thesaurus himself, Atticus, we go ahead and pick up a Magnemite. And at level 30 we can evolve it into Magneton, but since we can purchase Thunderstones, we can easily get it to a fully evolved Magnezone. Now you might think that having a Steel type on the team makes Atticus a completely free win, however a lot of his Pokemon have powerful ground type moves, so that isn't quite the case. Magnezone does however completely wall this Skuntank apart from its Sucker Punch, meaning that I can just go for 5 Thunder Waves to completely waste all of its Sucker Punch PP. However, I do end up setting up the Electric Terrain on the final turn just to boost up my Electric type moves. From there I Terrastalize into an Electric type and easily knock out the Skuntank in one hit, and you might find it strange to Terrastalize and get rid of my defensive Steel typing, however this allows me to survive Bulldoze way better and strike back with a Thunder to erase the Revavroom. It would have been advantageous if our Magnezone had a Steel Terra type since we would have taken the same damage from Bulldoze, but we wouldn't have had to take this Sludge Wave from the Muck the following turn. Regardless, a critical hit wouldn't have taken us out, but we would have taken less damage. However, I just end up going for an Electric Terrain boosted Volt Switch, swapping out into Jolteon, who can easily finish off the Muck with a Thunderbolt. This just leaves her Starmobile, which is incredibly fast, outspeeding even Jolteon, hitting it with a Noxious Torque, which ends up getting the poison before I can retaliate back with a Charm to lower its attack by 2 stages. At this point, Jolteon's taken a lot of damage, so I decide to swap out into Luxray, who can get a 3rd attack lower with Intimidate before getting hit by a Noxious Torque and also getting poisoned. Because of the -3 attack, however, Noxious Torque isn't doing too much damage, so I can set up Electric Terrain and then swap out the next turn with a Volt Switch. This allows me to send in Palmont at the end of the turn, which means it gets hit by Noxious Torque at the beginning of the next turn, allowing me to set up a free Bulk Up, miraculously not getting poisoned. Atticus aims to change that, however, by going for Smog, which does poison as I burrow under the ground to hit it with a Dig. Since Revavroom is faster, I dodge its next attack, allowing me to get in for a free hit, and Dig actually does some pretty decent damage. And despite being poisoned and about at half health, I still feel comfortable going for another Dig, getting a bit of damage before I have to swap out again. This time I send in Rotom, who gets hit by a Smog, and I didn't actually know that Smog could not poison. On top of that, I don't even get poisoned by the incoming Noxious Torque, allowing me to take out the Starmobile with an Overheat, claiming Atticus's badge. And while Atticus actually put up a challenge, this next fight was no issue at all. Larry is a normal type enthusiast, which means it's Palmont's time to shine once again. The one issue with taking on Larry is always that his Kamala goes for Yawn, so I end up setting up a Bulk Up the first turn and follow that up by a second Bulk Up, getting me to +2 defense before the Kamala can hit me with a Slam for minimal damage. The Yawn does then put me to sleep, but with a held Chesto Berry we can shake off that sleep and basically get +2 attack and defense for free. Because of that, both Kamala and Dunsparce fall to a single Brick Break each. This leaves Larry with Staraptor, a Pokemon that both outspeeds us and hits super hard with Stab Terra boosted Facade. However, because we have those 2 defense boosts set up, we can tank this and easily take it out with a 3rd Brick Break, sealing the win. I mean, so far the run has been going amazingly. I've been on cloud 9 just dropping thunders on people. But unbeknownst to me, that was all about to change. It all started with the battle versus Nemona right after defeating Larry. And I came in with a foolproof plan. Since this Lycanroc can barely touch me with Quick Attack, I set up a Bulk Up and then immediately take it out with a Brick Break. Goomy, get out of here with that nonsense. Once she sent in a Palmo of her own, I decided to set up with Agility since this thing can basically not touch me because of Volt Absorb. I then set up to +6 with Bulk Up, and a Brick Break is enough to take it out, leaving Nimona with her final Pokemon. Because of Terra, we won't hit Meowscarada for super effective damage, however, because of that agility, we can outspeed and one-shot. Wait, hold on a minute. Why am I hearing boss music? Nimona, we can talk about this. You don't have to do this. No. Somehow surviving, the Meowscarada completely ignores Facepalm's defense boost with Flower Trick. And even though Jolteon can come in and finish the fight with a quick attack, that doesn't change the fact that I just lost someone I learned to love during our travels together. If only you could revival blessing yourself, Palmot. Rest in peace. Anyway, our next opponent, Rhyme, is someone where Palmot wouldn't have been particularly useful at all. Instead, I decide to lead with Luxray and Rotom Heat, giving me an Intimidate to lower both Banette and Mimikyu's attack. I then decide to immediately Terrasilize Luxray, which will give me an Omni Boost at the end of the turn, so I use a Protect, as Banette fails to use Sucker Punch and Mimikyu tries to hit into my protecting Luxray with a Slash. Rotom then goes for Thunder Wave since we can still inflict status on Mimikyu despite its Disguise ability. The crowd then goes absolutely wild at my epic Terrasilization move, giving me an Omni Boost to both of my Mons at the end of the turn. Now that my Pokemon are faster than both of Rhyme's because of the boost, I go for a Thunder Wave to paralyze Banette as well, as Luxray hits the Mimikyu with a Crunch to break its disguise. I end up getting a lucky defense drop with Crunch as well, which shouldn't make a difference to the overall strategy. Then amazingly, both Mimikyu and Banette get fully paralyzed at the end of the turn. At this point, we're ready to start doing some damage, so we get hit by a Sucker Punch from Banette at first, then going for an Electro Ball, which doesn't quite take out the Mimikyu, and Banette gets taken out by a Crunch from Luxray. Only taking out one of Rhyme's Pokemon is actually the optimal outcome, since we get an attack and special attack boost every time we take out one of her Mons. The next turn, another Electro Ball is enough to take out Mimikyu's remaining health, and a Crunch from Luxray takes out the Houndstone. As Rhyme sends in her final Pokemon Toxtricity, the plan was to take it out with a +3 Crunch, however, Rotom was quicker to the draw, taking it out with a single Overheat. With the Ghost Badge in hand, I traveled to Paldea's coast to pick up our newest member of the team, a Tynamo. And after evolving it into Electric at level 39, since we can still buy Thunderstones, we can evolve it into its final evolution, Electros. And with a swift victory versus Nimona, it's finally time to take on the next Titan, Iron Treads. Since we beat Larry, we've had access to buying the Choice Scarf item, and since Rotom learns Trick, we can use it to give Iron Treads the Choice Scarf to lock it into a move, which I thought was a super clever strategy. However, just using Wide Lens Hydro Pump would have probably been better since Hydro Pump is a one-shot. For the second phase, I end up using the exact same strategy, tricking the Iron Treads the Choice Scarf, which this time goes for Stomping Tantrum against the Scovillain. And this actually just guarantees me the win since it can't hit me with ground moves because of Levitate, so I can just Hydro Pump it twice for the W. Which means Tulip is the one we challenge next. And I think Tulip should get the award for most forgettable Paldea gym leader. The plan to beat her was very simple: lower Farigiraf's attack with Charm, then use Agility and Baton Pass out into Electros. And with +6 speed, I can now set up to +6 attack, accuracy, and defense with Coil. From there, a +6 super effective Crunch is enough to take out the Farigiraf in one shot. However, Gardevoir actually managed to survive on what must be like 1 HP. However, a Psychic only did about half, so another Crunch is enough to take it out, along with Espathra and the Terrastalized Florges. You know, Glaciato has to be one of the emptiest towns in all of Pokemon. There's barely anybody here, and yet somehow there are still spectators for my gym fight. Where did you guys come from? With 7 Victory Road gym badges in hand, it's time to take on the final gym leader, Grusha, and his ice types. Not very surprisingly, I lead with Rotom Heat to try and take out the Frostmoth with a quad-effective Overheat. However, I end up missing as he sets up a Tailwind. This allows him to outspeed the next turn and hit me with a Blizzard for pretty pathetic damage before going down to the Overheat. The Tailwind is a pretty unfortunate speed boost to his team, but it shouldn't change too much in my strategy. Beartic has Aqua Jet, which outspeeds anyway, so I'm pretty much forced to swap out the first turn to not get hit by a super effective move. I send in Electros, who wouldn't outspeed regardless, but manages to dodge an Icicle Crash before hitting with a Wild Charge. The next Icicle Crash connects, leaving me at just 41 HP, and the next Wild Charge doesn't take out the Beartic, but luckily I survive the recoil as well, forcing me to swap out. I send in Luxray, who intimidates and therefore doesn't take half from an Icicle Crash. I then use a Wild Charge to finish off the Bear Tick, which actually managed to do a bit of damage to my team as Grusha sends in Titan. I then swap out of Luxray into Jolteon, who takes a lot of damage from an Ice Spinner. However, knowing that I'll outspeed, I go for a Charm to lower Titan's attack, which will allow me to survive a non-crit Ice Spinner. Being at such low health, I have to swap out of Jolteon, going into Magnezone, which barely takes any damage from an Ice Shard, and retaliate back the next turn with a stab super effective Flash Cannon, getting the special defense drop as a Liquidation barely does anything. A Flash Cannon is then enough to take out Titan, leaving Grusha with only his final Pokemon, Altaria. However, the problem for this Altaria is it only has moves that Steel types resist, and its most powerful move is Dragon Pulse, barely doing anything, so I can outspeed and just finish it off with a couple of Flash Cannons. And with a final gym badge in hand, I go to Alfornata Cave to pick up my next Pokemon, a Toxtricity. Having a Poison type on the team gives us some excellent coverage, particularly since our next opponent is Ortega of Team Star. And even though our newfound Toxtricity is super effective with its Poison type against Fairies, we're probably not going to need to use it at all. I even get lucky the first turn and get a special defense drop against the Azumarill, which just charms me, not doing anything, allowing me to take it out with another Flash Cannon the next turn. Darkspun and Wigglytuff then share the same fate, dropping to a single Flash Cannon, leaving Ortega with only his final Pokemon, the Starmobile. However, it basically has no way of doing damage to Magnezone, giving us a free opportunity to send this thing straight to the junkyard with a few Flash Cannons. While in the area, I make sure to add our next member to the team, being Dedenne. Since we have the Fighting type Team Star leader to face, this is the perfect time to pick up a Fairy type. I also go to South Province Area 5, where I can pick up a Wattrel on the beach. Much like Fairy, flying could be invaluable for the next fight, so I evolve my Wattrel into Kilowattrel. And so, with all my preparations out of the way, it's time to take on the final leader of Team Star, Airy and her Fighting types. I lead with Ghost type Rotom, expecting a Sucker Punch from the Toxicroak, giving me a free opportunity to set up a Rain Dance. I then swap out of Rotom, going into my Kilowattrel, expecting Toxicroak to go for a Sucker Punch again, which obviously fails. And with the Rain up, Hurricane has 100% accuracy, allowing me to one-shot Toxicroak, then Annihilate, and then conveniently Passimian right after. Airy's fourth Pokemon is then Lucario, which does have the Steel type to protect it from a super effective Hurricane, so I go for a Volt Switch instead, swapping into Dedenne, who can dodge a Dragon Pulse by being a Fairy. I then go for a Discharge, hoping it'll take out Lucario, but it leaves it in the red as it hits me with a soft, not very effective Aura Sphere. I then KO with Volt Switch, hoping to get to swap out, but apparently you don't get to when they send in a Starmobile. This is incredibly inconvenient since you have to waste a whole turn swapping into Rotom, giving the Starmobile a chance to set up with a Shift Gear. Airy then sets up to +2 attack and +4 speed with another Shift Gear as I set up the Rain once again with Rotom. I then swap out of Rotom back into Kilowattrel as Airy sets up with a third Shift Gear, getting to +3 attack and max speed. The Shift Gearing then gets absolutely out of control as Airy gets herself to +4 attack and maximum speed as I fire off a huge Hurricane for over half health. With +4 attack, Airy finally decides it's time to attack, but Combat Torque isn't quite enough to take me out, and with a 100% accurate Hurricane, I finish off the Starmobile, beating all of the Team Star leaders. With Airy defeated, we only have one giant Titan standing in our way of the Elite Four. But because this thing is basically a massive target for a super effective Thunder, it's not a big obstacle. This leaves me with an Elite Four team of Raichu the Raichu with Thunderbolt Fly, Grass Knot, and Encore. Pikachu the Dedenne with Volt Switch, Charm, Discharge, and Dazzling Gleam. Grumpy Cat the Intimidating Luxray with Trailblaze, Crunch, Wild Charge, and Volt Switch. Steely Shocks the Magnezone with Electric Terrain, Thunder, Volt Switch, and Flash Cannon. Zaptrace the Kilowattrel with Hurricane, Discharge, Volt Switch, and Roost. And Washington the Appliance with Hex, Discharge, Rain Dance, and Hydro Pump. They're really asking the tricky questions here, aren't they? Quiz aside, it's time to take on the Elite Four, first facing Rika with her ground types. This is probably one of our worst matchups in the entire game. Our only weakness, ground types. However, we can instantly eliminate this Whiscash by just going for a quad effective Trailblaze, boosting our speed in the process. However, as soon as Donphan enters the fray, we swap out into Rotom to dodge an Earthquake with Levitate. I then go for a Hex with the only purpose of breaking the Donphan's sturdy as it hits me with a Stone Edge with a critical hit. Seeing as I can survive another another crit, I stay in and go for the Hydro Pump, blasting the Donphan out of existence. Next is Dugtrio, and since there's no way it's going to go for an Earthquake versus the levitating Rotom, I swap out into Grumpy Cat to get an Intimidate as I get Rock Slided. Then expecting an Earthquake, I swap into Kilowattrel as Dugtrio sets up the Sandstorm. And despite Hurricane's accuracy, Zaptrace breaks through and takes out Dugtrio in a single hit. Rika then sends in Camera Up, so I go ahead and swap out back into Rotom, who gets hit by a Yawn on the switch. However, the next turn, I can just blast the Camera Up with a quad-effective Hydro Pump, taking it out in one shot. However, I do get put to sleep at the end of the turn because of Yawn. Rika now only has one final Pokemon left, being Clodsire. And this Clodsire can't really do much to Rotom. However, I can't do much back to this thing since I'm asleep, so I go ahead and swap out, sending in Steely Shocks. This works out perfectly since I swap in on a Protect for free and can fire off a Flash Cannon, getting a bit of chip damage before dodging an Earthquake. This gives me the opportunity to hit it with another Flash Cannon as it retaliates with an Earthquake, which I of course survive on my Sturdy. Obviously, any hit here will take out Steely Shock, so I go ahead and swap out into Zaptrace, who can come in dodging the Earthquake. Now that I know I won't get Earthquaked, I can swap out into Grumpy Cat to get off an Intimidate, as the Clodsire just goes for a Protect. And since Clodsire has gotten rid of its poison typing, I can use a super effective Trailblaze, leaving it on what must be 1 HP, boosting my speed before getting poisoned by Toxic. However, this isn't going to be a long-term problem, since another Trailblaze the next turn is enough to take out the Clodsire and taking out our first Elite Four member. Our second opponent is the Steel-type enthusiast Poppy, who leads off with Kappa-Raja, giving us the perfect opportunity to lead with Rotom, taking it out with a single Overheat. With Kappa-Raja out of the way, her second Pokemon is Bronzong. And since Rotom has harshly lowered its special attack with an Overheat, I decide to swap out into Steely Shocks, who can easily tank a Zen Headbutt. I then swap back into Rotom to dodge an Earthquake with Levitate, and can then take the Bronzong out with a full power Overheat. This of course puts me kind of in the same situation as after Kappa-Raja, with my stats lowered as she sends in Magnezone. Because of that, I decide to swap out into Zaptrace, as the Magnezone just sets up a light screen. I then go for a Volt Switch, which won't do too much damage, however it will break Magnezone's Sturdy. The plan is to swap out into Electros, who can hopefully take out the Magnezone with a single shot using Flamethrower. Except instead I get frozen by a Tri-Attack. Crap, this throws a massive wrench into my plan since I can't use Flamethrower at all this fight. So at this point, I just have to wing it and anything could happen, and very fortunately I don't get statused by a Tri-Attack, allowing me to take out the Magnezone with an Overheat. Poppy then sends in her Corviknight, so I decide to swap out since my special attack is lowered and go into Zaptrace. However, Corviknight just boosts its defense on the switch, allowing me to Volt Switch out the next turn, doing about 60% as I swap out into Rotom. I do end up getting hit by a Body Press on the switch, but the next turn I can hit it with a Discharge, taking it out, leaving Poppy with only one final Pokemon, her ace, Tinkaton. And because I miscalculated the EVs during my calcs, I end up losing Rotom to a Stone Edge. All I wanted was to be friends with my refrigerator. Rotom is such an incredibly versatile Pokemon, being able to change its type, that it is a huge loss, almost like losing several team members at once. After its passing, I end up doing a bit of switching around until I swap out into Grumpy Cat to get off an Intimidate on this thing as it goes for a Brick Break. It then hits me with a Gigaton Hammer, not doing too much damage as I try for a Crunch. Since you can't use Gigaton Hammer twice in a row, it goes for Brick Break, which I avoid through the power of friendship and hit it with another Crunch. Another Gigaton Hammer gets me deep into the yellow, but a final Wild Charge is enough to finish off the fight, beating Poppy. But after such a devastating fight, it's nice to have one lined up that's so easy versus Larry, who we beat very handily last time with Pawmot. Oh, Pawmot, I miss you. And this time around, it really wasn't any different, except for the fact that the guy conveniently uses flying types that we can just strike out of the sky. No, the real challenge of the Elite Four is going to be the Dragon Master Hassle. Leading off with Noivern, I send in Steely Shocks. And immediately, the Noivern takes out half of my health with a Super Fang, as a Thunder does about 70%. It then goes for Air Slash as I miss the next Thunder. It tries for a Dragon Pulse but misses as I miss Thunder again. A Hyper Voice then does not very effective damage as a third Thunder finally connects, taking out the Noivern. Hassel then sends in Dragalge, which is incredibly slow, allowing me to outspeed with a Volt Switch, swapping out of Steely Shocks into Grumpy Cat. The Intimidate doesn't do too much for me here since this thing is a special attacker, and Hydro Pump does some pretty decent damage. An Ice Fang then gets Dragalge into the red and incredibly manages to get a flinch. But of course I follow that up by missing the 95% accurate Ice Fang, allowing the Dragalge to hit me with a Sludge Bomb and poisoning me, which means I have to swap out into Kilowattrel. I get hit by a Sludge Bomb on the switch, doing pretty good damage, but a Hurricane is at least enough to take out the Dragalge. And that kind of just creates bigger problems for us as Hassel sends in his Haxorus, so I go for a Volt Switch, outspeeding and allowing me to swap out into Unagi. Getting hit by the Rock Tomb on the switch doesn't matter too much since I'm a lot slower regardless, but Dragon Claw hurts a lot more and close combat doesn't do as much damage as I was hoping for. And since another Dragon Claw would take me out, I swap out of Unagi into Pikachu, who can dodge it by virtue of being a fairy type. I then get hit by an Iron Head and unfortunately get flinched. Instant karma is real and my team is looking very grim. There's really nothing that I want to swap into this Iron Head, so unfortunately I have to sacrifice Pikachu, swapping in Jolteon, who can finish off the Haxorus with a Shadow Ball. But the man still has 2 dragons left, the first of which being Flapple, which I neutralize by going for a Charm as it tries to hit me with a Dragon Rush but ends up missing. I then continue charming the Flapple, getting it to -4 attack as it this time Leech Seeds me. Because of that, I decide it's time to switch, swapping out into Zaptrace as I get hit by a Dragon Rush, which barely does anything since it's at -4. I can then freely go for Roost, getting me back over half health as Dragon Rush continues to do nothing. I then continue roosting up to full and massacre the Flapple with a Hurricane. But this just leaves Hassel with his most powerful Pokemon, Baxcalibur, and I managed to get off a Volt Switch for some chip damage, swapping out into Grumpy Cat to at least get off an Intimidate. It's a very unfortunate means to an end, but at least your sacrifice meant something. After Luxray's demise, I send in Jolteon to get off a Charm, this way getting Baxcalibur to -3, allowing me to survive a Glaive Rush. I then go for another Charm, getting Baxcalibur to -5, hoping this will save me from the Glaive Rush, but unfortunately Bolt bites the dust as well. I then swap in Unagi, and I hope I can do some real good damage since you do double damage after Glaive Rush, but close combat isn't quite enough since it's shed its Ice type. However, Unagi survives the next one on 1 HP, allowing me the chance to take out Baxcalibur with close combat, leaving me with at least 5 Pokemon for the final fight. Somehow my Fainted Box is full of all my favorite electric types from this journey, and we've got to go up against the champion of all people with these rejects. But there was no way I was giving up, regardless whether my opponent was top champion Geeta herself. I lead with Choice Scarf Magnezone against Espathra, going for Discharge, doing a bit more than half damage and getting a Paralysis before it goes for a Lumina Crash, lowering my special defense by 2 stages. Another Discharge is then enough to take out the Espathra. In comes Avalugg, and expecting it to go for an Earthquake, I send in Unagi, who can dodge it with Levitate. I can then fight back with a Flamethrower, taking out the Avalugg in 1 hit because of its poor special defense. Geeta then sends in King Gambit, getting boosts from all its fallen allies with Supreme Overlord as it hits me with a Kowtow Cleave for a bit over half. However, I've got the quad effective close combat to take it out in 1 hit at the cost of my special and physical defense. And for that reason, I'm not too keen on staying in against her Go-Goat, swapping out for Magnezone as it goes for a Horn Leech. Magnezone is incredibly safe versus this Go-Goat, however, since it can only hit me for ineffective damage, allowing me to take it out with 3 Flash Cannons. Geeta then sends in Veluza, but because I'm locked into Flash Cannon due to my Choice Scarf, I decide to swap out into Kilowattrel, who gets hit by a Liquidation on the switch, doing about 40%. A Volt Switch then hits Veluza down into the red, allowing me to swap back out into Magnezone, this time not being locked into Flash Cannon and resisting the Ice Fang. Magnezone then picks up the KO with Volt Switch, not just taking out Veluza, but also allowing me to swap out as if it were set mode this turn, going into Raichu. Geeta then sends in her final Pokemon, Glamora, and I think it's time to Terrastalize into a Flying type as she Terrastalizes into a Rock type as I try to go for an Encore, which fails since I'm faster as she tries to go for Earth Power, which can't hit me because I'm flying now. However, the next turn I can just outspeed with Encore, locking her into a move that can't hit me. This means that Geeta is effectively soft locked into trying to hit me with Earth Power when that's not possible, allowing me to just take her out with as many Thunderbolts as I need. And what a way to become the champion with the very first Pokemon that started this journey. With our newly acquired championship title, we're gonna need some team replacements, first picking up a Mareep. I then head to the beach outside of Levincia to pick up a Pincurchin, possibly one of the most forgettable Pokemon of all time. Another Gen 9 Pokemon I haven't captured yet, however, is Bellibolt. Nothing quite like a fresh avocado.
Get to Del Taco! They got a new thing called Free Shavakadu!
I also head back to the Wasteland to pick up a Voltorb. I decided to name it Original because it's one of the original 151 Pokemon and the design's so incredibly original. I then get Mareep to level 30 in order to evolve into Ampharos before it's time to take on Director Clavel. This man is an imposter, a liar, an identity thief, and most of all, just a weirdo. His lead Pokemon, however, is Oranguru, hitting my Electros with a Yawn before I can retaliate with a Crunch, taking it out in one hit. I'm fairly certain that critical hit mattered, but I'm definitely not going to complain about it. Clavel's next Pokemon is Abomasnow, setting up the Aurora Veil, boosting both its defense and special defense as if it had dual screens up, which means my Flamethrower isn't enough to take it out despite being quad effective. Since it can't do too much damage to me, I decide to stay in to try and wake up, but once it gets me down into the red and I realize I'm not going to be waking up, I swap out immediately. I then swap in Steely Shocks, who can resist the Blizzard and barely take any damage as it takes out the Abomasnow with a Flash Cannon. This, however, baits in Clavel's Houndoom, which is a Pokemon that I don't have a good switch in for at all. So I swap out of Steely Shocks into Zaptrace to see how I can take the Fire Blast, and it actually ends up missing. So I go for a Volt Switch, trying to get a bit of chip damage on this thing, swapping out into Toxtricity, who's gonna have to tank the Fire Blast and unfortunately takes over half. I swap out again, this time into Electrode, who unfortunately also takes over half from Fire Blast, so I elect to just go for the Explosion, guaranteeing the KO on Houndoom, and going out on my own terms. From there, I send in Zaptrace as Clavel sends in his Poltegeist. I then immediately go for a Discharge, doing about 40% to the Poltegeist, but getting the Paralysis as it just tries to go for a Will-O-Wisp, not doing much since I'm a special attacker. I then go for another Discharge, getting Poltegeist into the red as it hits a Shadow Ball, getting a critical hit, taking out Zaptrace. Losing Zaptrace is kind of a big deal since having the flying coverage for grass types is huge. Since I took out Poltegeist with a Scarf Volt Switch, I swap out of Magnezone into Raichu as Clavel sends in Amoonguss. This thing got paralyzed after the first Thunderbolt, and I kept managing to do damage to it as it then eventually goes for Toxic. At that point, I decided to swap back into Magnezone as Amoonguss gets fully paralyzed and then destroyed by a Discharge. I went for Discharge instead of Flash Cannon because of the Choice Scarf, and I want to lock myself into an Electric-type move so that I can one-shot the final Quaquaval. But beating Director Clavel isn't the end of our troubles, since we now have to take on the real Cassiopeia, the leader of Team Star, Penny. And right off the bat, we can finish off her Umbreon with a couple of close combats, sending in her Flareon. And here we run into a similar problem like with Houndoom, where we can't take Fire-type moves very well. Fresh Avocado takes a massive amount of damage from Flare Blitz, leaving it below half, forcing me to swap out into L'Oreal, who also takes above half damage. We do, however, proc Static, allowing us to outspeed the next turn with a super effective Power Gem, which isn't quite enough to take it out, which means L'Oreal didn't get to do much. On the bright side, Flareon does take itself out because of the Flare Blitz recoil. This in turn lets me swap in Toxtricity for free, which can easily take out Vaporeon with Overdrive, and then Jolteon, Leafeon, and Sylveon with Sludge Bomb to finish off the fight. If I don't get to have an evolution, Penny, then you don't either. Our next opponent, Arvin, didn't manage to do much of anything except taking out my Avocado. I guess I'll just have to re-gift it. And with the Path of Legends complete, we have one more fight to face to finish the victory road. Nemona is a tough opponent, especially since we only have 5 Pokemon of our own. She starts by hitting my Focus Sashed Pincurchin with a Drill Run as I go for a Toxic Spikes. I then swap out of Pincurchin for Raichu as Lycanroc hits me for about 30% with Accelerock. I then Terra into Flying type and go for a Focus Miss as the Lycanroc of course misses the Drill Run. I'm then free to go for the Encore, the same thing I did versus Glamora, to lock the Lycanroc into a Ground type move, making it incredibly free to knock out Lycanroc with a few Thunderbolts. This baits in Nemona's Pawmot, and because I Terrassalized into a Flying type, this makes Double Shock an incredibly dangerous prospect. So I swap into Toxtricity, who can easily tank it, and the Resisted Close Combat, which lowers Pawmot's defense and special defense, allowing me to knock it out with one Sludge Bomb. Next, Nemona sends in her Earthworm, and expecting the very obvious quad effective Earthquake here, I go ahead and swap out into Unagi, who can dodge it with Levitate. Earthworm then hits me with Body Press, which doesn't even do half damage, as a Flamethrower easily takes it out in one hit. Nemona then sends in Dunsparce, which gets poisoned by the Toxic Spikes upon switching in, and hits Unagi with a Hyper Drill. I then clap back with a Close Combat, which isn't quite enough to take the Dunsparce out, even with the poison, so I'm forced to swap out. And expecting another Hyper Drill, I can send in Magnus Magnezone who resists it, as the Dunsparce then just goes down to poison. With only 2 Pokemon left, Nemona sends in her pseudo-legendary Goodra. This thing has incredible special defense, and anything I hit it with is probably going to be shaken off since Magnezone is special, which is why I just decide to go for a couple of Mirror Coats after it hits me with Muddy Water for the KO. This unfortunately leaves Nemona with one final Pokemon, being Meowscarada, which has a terrible matchup versus Steely Shocks, even after getting a critical hit with her second Shadow Claw, leaving Steely Shocks at just 15 HP. A second Flash Cannon is enough to get Meowscarada down deep into the red so that Pincurchin's Toxic Spikes finish off the fight. And so, with only 5 Pokemon left, I press on to the final quest of the game, the way home. And as it happens, there is actually a way for us to round out our team here in Area 0, because my personal favorite Paradox Pokemon happens to be a Rock and Electric type. I'm of course talking about Iron Thorns, but in my opinion they should have just named it Mecha Tyranitar, since it looks almost exactly like Mecha Tyranitar from Pokestar Studios. At this stage there's only one man, no, one machine, standing in the way of me and true glory. We've made it this far, all the way to the final boss, and lost 9 of our comrades, but it's time to see if they're up to the test. Turo's team is filled to the brim with exceptionally powerful Paradox Pokemon, leading off with the Iron Moth. And immediately Turo throws my plans out the window by critting Unagi, as I can go for a Bulldoze to take out the Iron Moth. Unfortunately, this critical hit means that Unagi does not have the health to be able to tank a Stone Edge, regardless if it's a critical hit or not, so I'm forced to swap out. The Stone Edge then does end up critting, but it doesn't matter since the Iron Thorns is faster anyway, taking out AC/DC. I send in Magnezone next, which can withstand a quad-effective Earthquake because of its sturdy ability and retaliate back with a Flash Cannon. It does a little bit less than half health, as the Iron Thorns then misses an Earthquake through the power of friendship, as another Flash Cannon takes it down into the red. Such luck is hard to replicate, however, as another Earthquake is enough to take out Steely Shocks. Our next hero is Pincurchin, who's never gonna outspeed, but can at least withstand a critical hit Earthquake through the power of Focus Sash. Surviving the hit, Pincurchin can strike back with a Poison Jab, taking out Iron Thorns' remaining health. However, that's about all that Pincurchin's gonna do, because Iron Jugulis immediately takes it out the next turn with a Dark Pulse. Man, this Pincurchin is a crit magnet. Raichu is then ready to deal out justice, taking out Iron Jugulis in a single critical hit Thunder, which is when Turo makes the grave mistake of using Fake Out with his Iron Hands. This is by far the worst move he could have gone for, since we can easily just use Encore and now lock him into a move that does nothing. Turo gave me the opportunity of a lifetime, and I'm about to abuse it to the fullest possible extent. I begin by lowering Iron Hands' attack with 3 charms to -6, and then go for Reflect to boost my physical defense even further. Then before switching out, I make sure to refresh my Encore so I can swap in freely to Meccatar. Not only does Encore give me a free turn to set up my first Dragon Dance, but Light Clay means that I have 5 turns to set up with Reflect intact. And so I give Meccatar the night of its life, allowing it to dance its heart out, boosting its stats to +5. The only reason I don't go all the way to +6 is because at the end of the 5th Dragon Dance turn is when Reflect runs out, and I really don't want a nasty critical hit to end this run. We've been crit more than enough so far this run, and I'm not taking any chances, taking out the Iron Hands with a +5 Earthquake. Turo then sends in Iron Bundle, but our third move slot is Brick Break, allowing us to take it out in one super effective hit. And thus, the evil AI from the future is left with only one Pokemon, the Iron Valiant, boosting up its attack with a booster energy. But it's not enough. It's never been enough to beat Meccatar, because one Heavy Slam in the final move slot is enough to take it out with a super effective hit. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how I beat a Pokemon Scarlet Hardcore Nuzlocke using only electric types. In fact, as my reward, the game gives me the ultimate electric-type Pokemon, Miraidon. But folks, I'm having a difficult time deciding who the MVP of the run was. We had so many good Pokemon. For me, it's a toss-up whether it's Raichu or Magnezone, but let me know who you think was the MVP of the run down in the comments below. Subscribe.